Hi, and welcome to my series Can I Rig It?, where I take random objects from real life and see if I can rig them in Blender. And today I'm gonna try to rig a car suspension. And we'll do this using the following steps. First we will create the base rig. Then we will create an inverse kinematic setup which will drive the suspension motion. We will also rig the piston and the spring. We'll also add some helper objects to define the height of the surface. These will then drive the overall movement of the suspension. And at the end, we will make sure to have the system flexible enough to duplicate and easily attach to your vehicle. By the way, I'm Nico, a 3D artist, and my passion are robots and other mechanical creations. So hello and welcome to another rigging tutorial. This time we're going to try to rig some car parts, and for this I decided to recreate a car suspension system. Specifically, this is a so-called double wishbone suspension system. And one of my followers actually suggested this one, and I found it so interesting and so intriguing that I had to try to recreate it. And in the end I thought, okay, let's do a tutorial for it. And now here we are. By the way, this tutorial will be only about the suspension system, so not about a whole car control rig or anything like that, just for the suspension system and the flexible adaptation of the tire to the ground. So here we have a main controller that is going up and down and adapting to the height of the ground. And we have also a spring and a piston that is very flexible and it's moving with the whole system. But it also has an empty that is very flexible to move around, so you can put this wherever you like, wherever it fits to your vehicle. It is also flexible in terms of where those two wishbones are placed. So for example, you can move those still around wherever you want, you can scale them, but be aware the geometry is also scaled with it. And you can move the top of the spring and the piston around and everything adapts. And you can even move the whole rig around and it all adapts to the ground. So for example, when I move it just on the X and the Y location, you see the tire goes up and down depending on the ground. So this is our geometry that we will be working with. And as you can see, we have the two wishbones here, we have the tire, we have the part where the tire is attached to. I'm not sure what this is called. And we also have a spring, and we have the two piston parts, which are basically just these two things that slide into each other. And the spring is basically just a curve that is created with the extra curve objects add-ons. It already comes with Blender, so you just need to look for it and check it. And at the beginning, it's not really important where the pistons are located, because we're gonna set it up so that we are very flexible where to put the top of the piston, so you can decide for yourself where it fits your car rig best. And also disclaimer, I will use the following shortcuts a lot, so maybe try to remember those. One is for the armature. When I press Ctrl Tab, I will go into pose mode and switch between pose mode and object mode, which is a fast way to go back and forth because we're gonna do this a lot. And the other one is Shift S. This is where you decide where to put the 3D cursor, because we need some precision to put it in certain places, and this will help us a lot. And by the way, you can get this file here for free through the link in the description below, so you can follow along on the tutorial. So we're finally starting with the part why you clicked on this video, which is the rigging part. So first we need an armature. So we will place it right here. And we already start with the shortcut Shift S. When we select the upper wishbone, Shift S, cursor to select it. And then we have the 3D cursor here. And from that point, we can now start adding the armature. So Shift A, armature, single bone. This is a little bit big, so let's put it to the side a little bit. So with every armature, it's very good to have a root bone for the whole rig where all the bones are attached to it, so you're a little bit more flexible in moving the rig around. So this will be our root bone. Let's rotate it 90 degrees and make it a little bit smaller. And with this part, we want to put it right here. So also Shift S, selection to cursor, and then it will snap to this part here. So we will also call it root, and then we will extrude another bone, which will be the upper bone here, up to this point here. We should also go into the armature properties and check in front so we see the bones all the time. And we put it right here. We don't have to be like millimeter accurate. It just needs to kind of work. Then we'll extrude with E again to the bottom here. So the next thing is that we're going to add an IK constraint, and this will help us create this suspension up and down movement. And we do this by creating another bone, which will be the IK target. So we're going to just extrude it one more time here with E. And then with Alt-P and clear parent, we're going to disconnect it so that it is an independent bone and it's not connected to all the other bones. And then we go into pose mode, so Control-Tab, pose mode. And here I'm going to show you the fast way to create an IK system, which is first select the IK target. We should also call it IK. I'm just going to call it IK. And then we're going to select the last bone in this chain here of 3. So this is the first bone, second and third bone. Let's Shift select. Then we press Shift I and add IK to active bone. And now when we move the IK target, you see we now have this solved kind of movement for all the bones so that they follow this IK target. But this goes actually a little bit too far because we just want this bone to rotate on this axis. And when you click on this bone that has the IK constraint here you can see it in the constraint properties, you see this yellow dotted line. And this shows how far the influence of the IK target is reaching. But we can limit this to just these 2 bones here in the chain length field. So right now it's 0. 0 means that it goes all the way to the first bone. But when we select a number, for example 2, it just influences those 2 bones. Now when we move it, it only influences those 2 bones. So the idea is to move it up and down, and this will drive the whole suspension. So the next thing that we need is we need another bone for the lower wishbone. So we go back into edit mode by pressing tab, and we're gonna just with Shift D duplicate this bone and move it down like here. And this is pretty much okay. So this will definitely work for our purposes. And we're gonna create a new IK system, this time with this bone here. And we're gonna do the same. We're gonna use this IK target for this bone too. So select IK target, select this bone here, Shift I to active, and it works. But we still need to limit this influence just for this one bone. So we're gonna limit the chain length to just 1. Now when we move it up and down, both follow the IK target. And by the way, if you're here, the chances are that you are a curious person and that you also like to learn and develop your own skills and evolve them even further. And I found that the best way to do so is with today's sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning platform with literally thousands of classes taught by industry-leading professionals. No matter if you're interested in art, music, photography, self-improvement, cooking, or even Blender, Skillshare has always the right class for you. And what makes Skillshare so unique is that they have curated classes and learning paths that lead you from the beginning to your desired goal. And especially with Blender, which is such a complex piece of software, it can be sometimes very overwhelming with all the possibilities and all the tools. So for that, Skillshare has a ton of great Blender classes by some people that you might know, like Derek Elliott, Southern Shoddy, or Smeef. I myself am also currently learning with the class Create a Realistic Sci-Fi Movie Scene by Darren Perincic. This one is very exciting because I am still learning and trying to get better at creating a proper mood and lighting setup and creating this feeling of awe in my films. And this course really helped me out a lot to understand lighting and how to set up a specific atmosphere. So if you'd like to start learning efficiently, then please click the link in the description. And the first 500 people who use that link in the description or scan this QR code here will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So get started today, and now let's get back to the tutorial. So this is almost done, but when you look closely, we have some problems here. Because when we move it up and down, this IK target is completely disconnected from the lower wishbone. And we need to follow this lower bone here up and down. So basically it needs to rotate around this pivot point here. And so far it's not doing that. So we need to set up some more constraints. And the ones that will help us with this are the limit distance constraints, because we need this IK target to always keep the distance to this pivot point. No matter where we move it, it always stays in this distance here, basically the length of this bone here. And we do this by adding some constraints to this one, mainly the limit distance constraint. And we choose the target, which is this bone here. So we select first the armature itself and then the bone. Let's call it wishbone 2, and this will be wishbone 1. The target bone is wishbone 2. And now you see this is set to inside. So now when we move it, we can move this IK target within this distance here, which is 46.2. This was automatically chosen from the location of the IK target. So we can move it within this distance, but when I try to move it beyond it, it's not gonna happen. And this is what we already want to have. So this is good, but it still can move inside this distance. So what we can do now is copy this limit distance constraint, but this time we set this one to outside, but we still keep the same distance, which is 46.2. And now when I deactivate the first one, just to show you what it's doing, you can move it outside of this area of 46.2 centimeters. But when I want to move it closer, it's not letting me. And with both activated, we have this very narrow, like Goldilocks zone, where it can just move on this axis around this pivot point. So we have basically already a working suspension system that's moving up and down. But there is also one more thing, which is that the IK controller can also move to the side. So when we go from top, you can move it left and right. And this shouldn't be possible because this can only rotate on those two axes here. Oh, by the way, I forgot to activate the screencast keys. Sorry about that. So how do we limit the movement of the IK target to just up and down? Well, there is another constraint for that, which is called limit location. We're gonna set it to local space, so we can still move it around the world, but it's still gonna be limited to its own little world where it can only move on its own local one axis. And when you go to the armature properties and check axis, you can see the local axis of each bone. And we see that we wanna move it just on its local x-axis up and down. So with the limit location constraint, we just check the Y and Z for minimum and maximum, so it can't move on those two axes, but it can still move on the x-axis. So now when we move it, you can see it just moves up and down, but there is still one thing, which is when you move it up and down, you see it breaks suddenly again. And this is just because of the order of those constraints. The limit location constraint needs to be the first one, so you move it just up before those limit distance constraints, and now it moves up and down and still stays attached to this lower wishbone. So now the next thing is we're gonna rig the piston here with the spring. And for this we go again into edit mode, so tab again, we're in edit mode, and we're gonna add two bones first, which is one bone for the upper piston and the other one will be for the lower part. First I'm gonna go into, again, control tab object mode, and I'm gonna hide the spring. We don't need it right now. And we need some bones right here, for example. So I'm gonna again shift S, press to select it, select the armature, tap into edit mode and shift A to add another bone. And this will be our upper piston part. So let's put it right here. This will be important later on because we need to set up those ends of the bones where the spring is also gonna start and end. So since the spring starts here, I can just bring it back. It's good to have the end right here. So this is pretty good. And we're gonna just duplicate this one, move it down, rotate it 180 degrees and put it right here where this hinge is. And this will control the lower part of the piston. Okay, so that's pretty great. Now we also need to connect this one to this bone because it needs to move with it. So select this one, shift select the lower wishbone, control P, keep offset. Now when we go again into pose mode, this one moves with it. This one will stay independent because as you've seen in the beginning, an empty will control the position of this part. So it can be disconnected for now, that's fine. And now we need to make sure that these two bones look at each other because that's how a piston basically works. No matter where you are, those two bones will always face each other, and this will make sure that those two piston parts always slide into each other. And we do this with another constraint, which is called the damped track constraint. And for now, I'm going to show you a method that is very easy, but this also has a little problem that we're going to work around it. So what we can do is make it face this bone here. So first, the target is the armature and also this bone here. So now when we move it, it always faces the bottom of this bone here, which is what we want to have. So that's pretty cool. And we're going to do the same with this one here, also damped track. First the armature and then select the bone, which is called bone 001. That's fine. So now you can see the upper bone here is constantly facing this one. But we need to be careful with this setup. Depending on how the bones are parented to other bones, this can cause some problems. For example, if we parent this bone to this bone here with Control P, keep offset, and we move this around, for example, they look at each other, so far so good. But when I reset the position of the IK target, you see now this one is facing somewhere else. And this is easily fixed if you just reset the position one more time with Alt-G, then it snaps back. But in animation and in baking, this can cause some issues. So what I like to do is not make the bones face each other, but face some empties that are positioned at the same location. This way you can work around this problem and you don't need to worry about it. First, we're gonna unparent this one again, so clear parent, so that it's completely disconnected. And we're gonna add some empties here, so we're gonna go into object mode again, Shift A, add an empty. Let's take a little sphere, make it maybe a little bit smaller, and duplicate this one and put it also right here. So right here. So these are our two positions, and we can parent this one to this bone here. And the way you do it is you select the geometry or the object, then the armature. Control Tab to go into pose mode, choose the bone that you want to parent this empty to, and then Control P and you choose bone. And now the empty is connected to this bone here, so whenever I move it, the empty is moving with it. And this bone will be connected to this empty. And the other way around, it's a little bit more complicated, because now you need a constraint for the bone to be attached to some geometry or to some empties, where all we need is a child of constraint. So this is basically a parenting constraint, and it works the same way as directly parenting, but you have a little bit more control over it. First, it needs to be on top, because that's the main thing that's going to happen first, and then the damp track constraints should be applied. Our target is this empty here, and now if I go back into object mode with Control Tab, I move it around, you see I move the bone with it. And now all we need to do is make those bones look at those empties here. So this one is the damp track, not the armature, but this empty here, and the same for this one. So reset it and let's look at this empty. Now when I go into object mode again, Control Tab, I move this empty around, you see this bone is now following or looking at the empty. And when I move this empty, you see this other bone is also looking at it. And I think now's a good time to attach all the geometry and all those objects here to our armature, just to see if everything is working properly and how it looks. So I'm gonna set the viewport display to stick so we see everything a little bit better. And again, we're gonna attach the geometry the same way we attach the empty to the bones, which is select the geometry, shift selecting the armature, Control Tab to go into pose mode, selecting this bone here, because this is our upper wishbone bone, and Control P and select set parent to bone. Now when we move this setup, you see the object is moving with the bone. And we're going to do this for all the other ones. So again, and now everything should move as it should. So let's deal with the spring now. First we need to shorten this bone here, so I'm going to go into octahedral again. We need to shorten it a little bit until this point, so where the spring starts, but this will affect the piston that we attached, because right now when I'm going to scale it down and go back into object mode, you see it slid down a little bit. But we don't want that, so we're going to undo this, and first we're going to unparent this one with Alt-P, clear and keep transformation. And now we're going to shorten the bone a little bit until here. And now when we go back into object mode, we can now attach it again. And now we need another bone, which will start here and stretch to this one. And no matter the distance, it will always be connected. And the spring will also stretch and squash with the bone. So we go back into edit mode. We're going to extrude another bone upwards until this point here. So this is good. And in pose mode, so Control Tab, choose pose mode. We're going to add another constraint for this bone. We can also call it spring, and it's called stretch to, because that's what we want to have. We want to stretch it to a certain object or bone. And this bone will be this one here. So let's choose first the armature again, and then the bone, which is just called bone. But the thing is that now when you move it, you will see it doesn't completely stay connected to this bone. And this is because it's stretching to its start, to its, I think it's the tail and this is the head, or maybe the other way around, I'm not sure. I always confuse those two. But we can change it from head to tail. So I guess this is the tail. If we slide it from 0 to 1 completely, and now you see it moved a little bit, but we can just reset it when we just change the original length. We just click the X, and now it snaps back to its original length. And now it's stretching to the tail, so this part here of the bone. So now when we move it, you see it always stays connected. And even when we move this here, this bone here is completely connected and stretches with the position. And now we're going to attach the spring to this bone so that it can also deform. So let's unhide the spring. This is it. That's the curve. And the way we attach it is with a hook modifier. A hook modifier basically lets you attach things to each other based on the vertices of those objects. So first we select the armature, go into edit mode and select this bone. Then you go out of edit mode again, shift select the spring, go into edit mode of this curve, and then select all those vertices. You can either box select them or just press A, so all of them are selected. And with Control H, H for hook, you get this little dialog, and you can select hook to selected object bone. And when we do this, it knows, okay, the last selected bone was this one here. Now when we go back out of edit mode and we move this, you can see, hey, the spring is also stretching with the bone. But you can see maybe one thing is that the spring is very squishy. But there's an easy fix for that, which is if you go to the stretch to constraint, you just set the maintain volume to none. And then when you move it, you see it maintains its volume and the radius of the spring stays the same. And so far we have the suspension system complete. So now we can set an individual position for the upper part of the piston and the spring. So let's put it maybe right here. This is kind of how it looks like. And now we're gonna create a system where the tire will always follow the height of the ground, which is actually a little bit more simple than I thought in the beginning. So let's do this. There is a ground also that we have here, and I animated this ground to move instead of the tire to move. This is just to set up the system, but in the end you will be able to move a car, for example, with those attached tires and the suspension systems, and everything will adapt to the ground. So this is our ground now, and the thought process is that we first would like to have some object that is constantly following the height of the ground, and we can attach our IK controller to this object so it also moves with the height of the ground. And a perfect object would be an empty that is always just following the curvature of the ground, but it can't do this just by itself. It needs another helper object, which will be a plane with a shrink wrap modifier, because a shrink wrap modifier is designed to follow a certain surface no matter how it moves, how it behaves. And we're going to combine those two objects, and these will drive then the suspension system. So let's do that. So first we need a plane. So let's put it maybe right where the tire is. Maybe let's move the ground a little bit lower. Let's maybe here. We can create a plane, which is a little bit big. So let's make it a little bit smaller. Apply the scale with Control A scale. This is always a good idea. And then we're gonna subdivide it in edit mode a few times. Let's say maybe this many times. This is already more than enough. And now we're gonna add a shrink wrap modifier, and our target will be the surface. So let's choose the surface, and it snaps to the surface. Maybe change the offset to 0.1 so we can see a little bit better. And now when I play the animation, you see it's following the surface of the ground no matter how it looks like. So this is already pretty cool. We also, when I deactivate it, we also need to make sure that it is definitely above the highest point of the ground. That makes it a little bit easier for the shrink wrap modifier to project itself onto the ground. When it's a little bit lower, it can get a little bit buggy, so make sure to do that. Now we need an empty, so let's create an empty, maybe here. Let's make it a simple plane. I will also put it in front so we can see where it is, and make it a little bit smaller, like this, maybe 20 centimeters. So now we want to attach this empty to this plane here so that it's also moving up and down. And we do this with a child of constraints. And yes, empties can also have constraints, child of, and this will be a child of the plane. But this won't work so far. It is a child of the plane, but the center of the plane isn't moving. The geometry is moving, or the mesh is moving. And we want to attach it to the mesh itself. So first we need to select a vertex that we want to attach this empty to, which we do in edit mode. So we just, let's take this one in the center, go into the data properties, vertex groups, click plus to select a new group, and then with this one selected, just press assign. Let's call it maybe pin. And now when we select the empty again, go into the constraints, we have here this vertex group field, and we can choose pin. And this will snap a little bit lower, but we can reset it when we just click set inverse. This is now attached to this plane. And now when we play the animation, you see this empty is following the plane up and down, left and right. And this is now a perfect setup to drive our suspension system. So what we can do now is make this IK target follow this empty. And there are two ways to do this, either with a copy location constraint or a child of constraint. And I experimented a little bit with both of those, and I found out that the child of constraint works a little bit better, so we're gonna use this one. So we're gonna choose the IK target here. This already has some constraints, so we add one more child of, and this should be the first one. And then we're gonna just choose this empty here as a target. Now, you see, it already moves with the empty. But you also see that it goes a little bit crazy here because it's copying all its rotation, location, and scale. And we don't need that. That's a little bit too much. So what we can do is just uncheck all those here, and we just need the location. Now, it's working pretty great. And the great thing is with the child of constraint that we can manually just change the height of the tire and put it on the ground. Now you can see it's following the ground perfectly, and that's basically it. So there are a few more small optimizations that we can do. For example, so we can move this part here around so that it moves left and right with the tire. Right now we have this bone here, but we can't really rotate it without it influencing all the other ones because it has the IK constraint. So when we rotate it, you see the upper wishbone is rotating with it. So what we can do is add another bone that will be controlling the rotation of the wheel. So first we go into the armature properties, go into the rest position. So we're going to add another bone, which should be in the middle of this one here. Shift S to put the cursor in the center. Then we go to the armature edit mode by pressing tab and just Shift A to add another bone. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees, make it a little bit smaller, and move it also a little bit more back to where the rotation is going to happening. So maybe when we select those two parts here and then Shift S, cursor to selected, it will snap in between those two objects. So now when we go back into edit mode, we're going to hide this bone by pressing H just so we can see what is going on. I'm going to select this end here, Shift S, selection to cursor. Now the pivot point is exactly between those two here. So this is perfect. So with Alt H, we bring everything back. And we're gonna attach this bone to this one here. Select the first one, select the second one, Control P, keep offset. And now we're gonna also attach this one to this bone here. And now when we go into pose position again and Control Tab to pose mode, we can now rotate this whole piece also. So now you might be wondering, how do I attach it to a car maybe? Well, when you move the whole rig around, so you select the whole armature and just move it, you will see it's still not working properly. And that's because first we need to attach this empty to this root bone and also to attach this plane to this bone. And this is fairly simple. First we're gonna select this empty, then the armature, Control Tab to go into pose mode and attach it to the bone. So now this is already moving with this bone. And what we can do here with this plane, we can just attach it to the whole armature. So select the plane, select the armature with Shift, and then Control P, Object, Keep Transform. And now, when we move the whole armature, everything's working. When I move it around the X and Y axis, you see it's constantly adapting to the height, and we can move the whole system around with just moving the rig. To make it a little bit more realistic, we can also animate the wheel, but this can be very tricky because it depends on speed, on curvature, on if it's going forward, backwards, to the side, the speed constantly needs to change. So I decided to just kind of eyeball it and just kind of guess the rotation speed, because in the end you can't really tell if it's working perfectly to the centimeter. It doesn't need to be super accurate. So I will just rotate this whole tire. So let's press K, rotation. And then let's go maybe 150 frames and just rotate it on its Z axis, maybe let's say 3000 degrees. Insert keyframe, okay, and also select all of these, press T and make it linear. So now you see it's rotating. I made a little gap into the tire so we can see the rotation. And it's rotating, but just a little bit too slow maybe. Let's delete Y and X because it only needs to rotate on its Z axis. And then what we can do is select both of those, Shift E, and choose linear extrapolation. And this will extrapolate the whole movement in a linear way so that it's constantly rotating indefinitely. And by just moving one keyframe maybe a little bit up, we can change the speed of the whole rotation. So maybe do it like this, or maybe go a little bit slower. Yeah, this seems about right. And now when you have the whole system in one collection here, you can just duplicate it, duplicate collection, and you have another armature that you can just move maybe back. You can see it's also adapting to the ground, and duplicate it again. Select the armature and mirror it with Control M and on the x-axis. And the same with the first one here. Also duplicate collection, also mirror Control M, X, mirror it on the x-axis. So now you have 4 wheels, and you can move all of them independently from each other, and they will constantly adapt to the ground, which is cool. All we need to do is add a car, so I will just maybe add a cube, make it a little bit bigger, a little bit lower. This is just for showing what you can do with it. All you need to do is just attach all those 4 to this cube. So Control P, keep transform. And now when you move it around, this is your car. You can animate it, you can make it go left and right. What I like to do, especially for this uneven ground, is to give it a little bit of a wobble kind of thing. And this is not physically accurate because this is super complicated to calculate all the movement of the car depending on the ground. I think in geometry nodes this is way easier with the simulation nodes and everything. So if you want to make it move super realistically, look for tutorials for that kind of car rig, because this is way easier. What I like to do is mostly hack my way through all those systems just to make it look believable but not be super accurate. And what I like to do is just animate the car, give it a keyframe just for rotation, and then I go into the modifiers for one of the axes, the x-axis for example, and choose the noise modifier. And this, if you look closely, this gives some randomness to the curve, and it moves a little bit jittery, but we can change the strength to 0.1 maybe, and the scale to maybe 15, so it's very stretched. And now you can see it kind of moves on its x-axis up and down. Maybe it can move a little bit faster like this, and we can copy this modifier with this button here, choose the Y rotation and paste it. And now it moves on both axes a little bit like left and right. We can offset this one a little bit more and maybe give it a little bit more strength. And now you have this kind of car movement based on the ground, which kind of looks realistic, I think. At least realistic enough. And the great thing is now you can move also the car around. Even when the ground is moving, the car is moving. You can animate the car. You can put it a little bit higher, like a moon rover maybe. And one thing I forgot to mention is that sometimes when you move your whole car around and you move the rigs around, it can happen that the rig doesn't properly follow the empty. So you can see here the empty is very active, but the rig isn't properly moving with the empty. And I'm not sure what the reason is, probably because of the whole stack of all those constraints, but you can fix it when you go into pose mode. You choose the IK target, and in the child of constraint, you just click on set inverse. This will basically reset it, and now you can adjust the height. And now when you play the animation, now you see the IK target is now properly following the NT. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you very, very much for watching this tutorial. I hope you learned something. I gotta do the YouTube thing again, so if you like this video, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more of those videos, then please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. If you'd like to support me even further, then I would really, really appreciate it if you would consider joining my Patreon. This is the best way to support this tutorial series, but also the production of my short film series. And what you will also find there is my rigging beginner course, where in each episode I will teach you various principles of rigging, including things like robotic arms, legs, cables, gears, and pistons. And also, if you have any suggestions on what I should rig next, then please leave a comment below with your suggestion, and maybe in a future video I will do that. But besides that, thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one. Take care and bye bye.